I shared on my community tab that I was going to be making this video, and the comment section was a hot mess. One comment that stuck out to me was, "It's true. Everybody has autism, ADHD, and is gay. I believe some people just want to find peace in why they are the way they are through a label so they can feel validated and comforted." Someone else said, "Autism is a spectrum. By definition, everyone is somewhere on that spectrum." And then another comment was, "Isn't that including you?" This video was actually inspired by a video posted that has since been deleted by Madison Brown, and she actually titled it the exact same thing: "Everybody's got autism, and apparently so do I." She is not autistic. The video is pretty much inspired because people were saying that she should look into autism since she was more introverted.
Something that I had to come to terms with is the fact that I love being alone, not because I'm protecting my peace. I mean, that is true, but it's because I have control issues. I hate doing things on other people's time. I'd rather get up, do something as soon as I want to do it, go to that country that I want to go to when I want to. I don't want to compromise. I don't want to do what you want to do. I don't want to split this, split that. No. I would rather eat the cost and do it alone.
It is pretty bold to assume or tell somebody that they fall into a certain category because of one specific action. However, I think that she did not do extensive research before posting. I was watching a video critique by the content creator Poetic Justice, and I really appreciated that they brought up the fact that when it comes to autism, there's not a lot of care surrounding the conversation. I think that when a lot of us think about disability, we think about something or someone being defective, and that is really fucked up. I figured out that I was autistic this past summer, and I'm also a self-diagnosed autistic person, and that was actually one of Madison's points in the video that she posted. You know, everybody's diagnosing themselves with autism these days. And I think it's really important to mention that whenever marginalized groups of people, women, people of color, etc., get access to certain kinds of information or opportunities, it seems like at that point society has decided that too many people are X, Y, or Z, even when it comes to the conversation around influencers. Once a lot of people of color were able to be more mainstream influencers, all of a sudden influencing was dead. It is a fact that there has been a recent upsurge in discourse about autism on social media, more specifically TikTok, and that ranges from content on, very broad traits and signs of autism to people's traumatic experiences dealing with the disability. I don't think that it's possible to diagnose yourself off of a couple or a few TikToks. I think that when most people are self-diagnosing, they are doing so after gaining a lot of knowledge and research. Something else that I forgot to mention is that I feel like the energy that self-diagnosis gets is very similar to the energy that false abuse allegations get, if that makes any sense. Like, there's so much energy focused on this very small percentage of people participating in this terrible behavior, and not the larger percentage, the majority of people that are actually being very honest and open about their experiences. I feel like a part of it is also just society's discomfort with directly addressing problems. I think that we like to sweep a lot of things under the rug and focus on everything else but the actual fucking issue. I don't know. The conversation around self-diagnosis is also very nuanced. As a self-diagnosed autistic, this information has literally saved my life. Only just recently have women and people of color and people within the LGBT community been able to have access to autistic resources and information that is more holistic in its approach. To be against self-diagnosis is classist, because then what do you tell people that cannot afford to see a therapist, a psychiatrist, or spend the thousands of dollars that autism tests usually cost? When I went to my psychiatrist to talk about me having autism, they agreed, but I had to see an autistic specialist to then diagnose me with autism. I was put on a 5-month waiting list. What is a person supposed to do in between all of that time? And then even when you are able to get a diagnosis, most autism research centers white male children, upper class white male children at that. When I was doing more research on autism and I went to a bookstore to read something on it, I had to go to the parenting section. I am 23 years old. You don't become less autistic or less ADHD as you get older. A lot of mental health professionals rely on outdated research, and a lot of them are not dealing with the issues that they are diagnosing people with themselves. Specifically, when I was getting diagnosed or looking to get diagnosed with ADHD, I had one psychiatrist tell me that I couldn't have it because I had substance abuse issues. I was told that I couldn't have it because I made a list of my signs and traits, and that a person with ADHD wouldn't be able to do that. I was told that I was just trying to be diagnosed with ADHD because it sounded better than depression. When I was talking about autism to my therapist, I had to quite literally educate her on what it was outside of her very narrow perception of it. I was told that I was high functioning, which is also a very harmful label. After getting diagnosed with autism, it doesn't always change your life for the better. In fact, there are several downsides to being diagnosed with autism. Having an autism diagnosis on your record affects the jobs that you can get. You literally cannot immigrate to certain countries, and I know that Australia and New Zealand are two of the countries on that list. You can't own a firearm, you cannot enlist into the military, even though I'm not the biggest advocate for that, but people got to do what they got to do. There is really no beneficial treatment for it, and a lot of the treatment that you'll see with autism is trying to cure it. There's nothing wrong about being autistic. It is simply a different way of being. If you have a diagnosis on your record, you may not be able to access gender-affirming healthcare. Providers may deem you too incompetent to make that decision for yourself. You can be denied organ transplants. You pretty much can lose your autonomy. You can lose parental rights. Some people will still seek an autism diagnosis, however, because they want to receive disability benefits, they want to get accommodations, and then you can also sue somebody if they are discriminating against you based on your autism. Now, even within that conversation, when it comes to disability benefits, the way that they are set up in the US is to keep you poor. I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but you can only have so much saved up in a savings account if you are disabled, and you also lose disability benefits if you do get married. Also, when it comes to being able to take somebody to court for discriminating against you, you have to have the money to do so, and a lot of disabled people are not able to afford literal, basic necessities in the first place. Now, what is autism? I know that when I brought up being autistic to certain people, they thought that I was referring to Down syndrome. Autism, according to Unmasking Autism by Devon, is a neurological and behavioral disability. This whole everybody's a little bit autistic, or you can be slightly autistic, or everybody's on the spectrum, it's not a fucking thing. I think the problem with this conversation is that autism is seen as this linear spectrum from just a little bit autistic to very autistic. And when I say very autistic, I'm talking about the more stereotypical representations of autism in media. That is literally just one way to be autistic. I'm going to put a diagram on the screen, but it's more helpful to look at autism as just this wheel of needs pretty much, and it's divided into categories based on the disability itself. With autism, you're pretty much disabled due to an environment that can't or will not meet your needs. I think that the way that disability is addressed is also very problematic because it puts so much focus on the issues that having a disability causes other people and not the issues that being disabled has on the disabled person. If you are autistic, you are a part of the neurodivergent community, and that could be a whole nother conversation in itself. I think that the neurodivergent community has pretty much minimized being neurodivergent to autism and ADHD, which is not the case. You can have OCD, narcissism, dyslexia, a bunch of other things, and be considered neurodivergent. Neurodivergent is pretty much anybody who, according to psychology, differs from what is considered normal. I want to share an excerpt from a book that I finished reading a year or two ago called Divergent Mind. When I was reading the autistic section, I literally highlighted damn near every sign or trait, and I was like, I still don't have autism. What I thought it was not what was laid out in the book, even though a lot of fucking research was done. I was just in denial. And I think that that's also just because of the shame and the dehumanization that comes with being, seen as an autistic person. They pretty much begin the autistic section by saying, A person with so-called classic autism is what many doctors and lay people describe as socially awkward in their own world and lacking empathy in normal or appropriate social interaction. This pathologizing language describes a person in terms of individual norms and expectations. We don't often stop to think about what is happening in society on a larger scale that would generate such a description or make such a person sound so bad. Only when we step back and examine the behaviors from a non-stigmatized perspective can we realize that people described this way aren't bad, they are merely different when measured with an established, and some might say arbitrary, barometer. In fact, many people in the autistic community like to flip the script and point out how awful neurotypical culture and expectations are. Think small talk, social niceties, herd mentality, compliance, and other unpleasant or taxing behaviors that are deemed normal. Or how well you can come across as civilized, which is heavily influenced by white culture. When it comes down to signs of autism, it is kind of hard to find resources that talk about it through a lens that isn't pathologizing it. One of the first signs that I have down is taking things very literally. Non-autistic or holistic people, I have found, convey a lot of what they want to say, not necessarily through words, but through facial expressions, through body language. And I find that a lot of autistic people convey what they want to say primarily through words if they are verbal. I know that when I was younger, this was a huge issue for me because it made me very quote unquote gullible. And I was just very trusting of people because I wasn't putting in that extra effort to figure out what they meant behind what they were actually saying. It's definitely landed me into some interesting predicaments. I remember when I was in elementary school, and this is more of a lighthearted example, but I didn't really conceptualize what it meant to be Black, specifically because I grew up around Black people. And so even though I had seen a white person on TV and I had a white doctor and all that jazz, when a peer of mine brought up the fact that I was Black, I became very frustrated because I was just like, the fuck are you talking about? Like, I'm brown. Can you not see? However, moving to the suburbs, I quickly figured out what they meant. A lot of autistic people need strict routine and can experience overwhelm or meltdowns when they do not have a routine that they can follow. And a lot of people do benefit from, having a routine. However, it can literally be just a slight change in that routine that would send an autistic person pretty much over the edge. A lot of autistic people avoid eye contact or just have difficulty with it. Overall, I know that this is an issue that I definitely struggle with, and I wouldn't even label it as an issue. I think I kind of only see it through that lens because eye contact is seen as a sign of respect, when really for me, it's easier for me to focus on what somebody is saying when I'm not actually looking at them. And I also can find eye contact to be very threatening, or at least that's just like how it feels. A lot of autistic people will be, very monotone or have a very flat tone of voice. I think that because holistic people commonly convey what they're trying to say through tone of voice or facial expressions, coming across that way can be deemed or viewed as rude or as though you're disinterested in what's being talked about or what's going on. Autistic people often have intense or special interests. A lot of websites would describe it as obsessive. Just knowing an extensive amount of information about very specific topics. I know that when I was in middle school, I was a huge One Direction fan. However, I could not just leave it there. I had to also write fan fiction and stay up till 3 a.m. imagining that I was the girlfriend of Harry Styles. And anybody that was on Wattpad probably had some kind of mental health issue or concern. A lot of autistic people are known to be very direct or blunt. I've heard this literally all of my life, but it is so much extra effort to speak in implications. It is so much extra effort to not just say things how they are. Now, there are, quote unquote respectful ways to go about conveying what you want to convey, but autistic people and really everybody, I feel like, benefit from direct communication and not having to read between the lines all the time. When things are up to interpretation, the mental gymnastics that autistic people have to do, whenever I think about, how direct and blunt a lot of autistic people are, which can also get us, the label of being a bitch, rude, or whatever the fuck aggressive maybe. I think about that TikTok Kanye audio.
I just tell the truth, and telling the truth is crazy in a world full of lies.
I don't support Kanye whatsoever. But yeah, anyways, a lot of autistic people have issues understanding social cues. Social cues are verbal or nonverbal signals expressed through the face, body, voice, motion, and guide conversations as well as other social interactions by influencing our impressions of and responses to others. A great example of a social cue that is a question that is commonly asked on a daily basis is, how are you? You're not supposed to be honest, or at least be fully honest about how you're actually feeling. I'm personally going to just start saying terrible whenever somebody asks me, because cereal is $9. The point of the question is to just guide a conversation, start a conversation. Usually somebody is looking for reciprocity. If you were to go in depth about how your dog died, or, how your boyfriend cheated on you and how it's been making you feel, that is actually more socially unacceptable than asking a question where you didn't really care about the answer. A lot of autistic people can be seen as overly expressive or not at all. A lot of autistic people will struggle with sensory sensitivities and sensory overwhelm when they are not able to accommodate themselves or receive accommodations. Autistic people may have trouble with speech, or they may speak in stilted speech. I know that I personally have a speech impediment. You would never know because I edit the fuck out of these videos. There can definitely be developmental delays when it comes to things such as that. I know that when I was younger, I didn't actually learn how to walk until I was like 1.5 or 2. Apparently I just rolled everywhere, and in my defense, I think that rolling is very efficient. However, walking is obviously a very important skill to have as a human being. A lot of autistic people stim or fidget or just participate in very repetitive behaviors. Autistic people are also bottom-up thinkers and very detail-oriented. I found that a lot of holistic people are more so top-down thinkers. They can see a bigger picture and then they get down to the details. Autistic people have to take in all of the details and then they can come up with a conclusion or know how to approach a situation. I don't think the bottom-up thinking or top-down thinking, one is better than the other. I think that they're both helpful. However, I know that when you are a bottom-up thinker, some people may perceive you as quote-unquote slow, which is also very ableist. Don't say that shit. It just takes you a lot more time to understand concepts because you're not jumping to conclusions about them. Also, when it comes to being very detail-oriented, due to having very easily activated neurons, for me, when I am in spaces that have too much stimuli or just a lot of different components in my brain would then need to take in and understand, I get very overwhelmed. A lot of autistic people have lower cognitive empathy and higher affective empathy. A lot of autistics are known to have a very strong sense of justice. When it comes to morality, I feel like a lot of autistic people apply their morals more universally, so it doesn't really matter the title that you hold, who you are, the same rules apply. Neurotypical people may apply their morals more situationally. I think that also when you are autistic, you face a lot of discrimination and alienation from society, so you are more easily able to understand the hardships that come with not receiving justice. When it comes to having a strong sense of justice, though, just like anything else, this is very dependent on your environment. It's not like every autistic person has the same sense of morals and what justice actually looks like. One website said deficits in social communication and struggling with small talk. And I honestly hate the way that this is framed, just because when it comes to these deficits, autistic people don't have the same energy to spend on certain things in conversations. Because our brains are always picking apart everything around us, a lot of autistic people may go into conversations or social scenes with a script already kind of created based on what they have gathered from social interactions around them. I feel like growing up autistic, it just felt like everybody was in on this joke or just way of being that I had no fucking clue about, and so I was always trying to figure out how to do something instead of just doing the thing. Socializing can also be difficult because, like I said, I'm always focusing on how to be social, and that gets in the way of just being social because there are so many rules that come with it. Trouble with lying or just understanding when you're supposed to lie. Because that's not saying that autistic people can't lie or don't know how to lie. I definitely understand the benefit of it. However, it does take more mental effort to do so because my brain is just focused on delivering whatever the truth of the matter is. I think that also when it comes down to the trouble with lying, that can set you up for having trouble with understanding when somebody's being manipulative or deceitful. I think a lot of us traumatized autistics have a little bit better of a grasp on this because we have been taken advantage of in several situations and scenarios. In Divergent Mind, there were examples from people that are more specifically assigned female at birth. I identify as non-binary, however, growing up socialized as a woman, I definitely related to a lot of the things that were being said. Escaping in thought or action to survive overwhelming emotions and senses, escaping through fixations, obsessions, and over-interest in subjects through imagination, fantasy, daydreaming, and mental processing, being confused by the rules of accurate eye contact, tone of voice, proximity of body stance, and posture in conversation. I have a very difficult time perceiving the space around me, and I can come across as very clumsy because of that. Feeling as if she's on stage, being watched, and or having a sense of always needing to act out the right steps. This one is probably when I should have realized that I was autistic, just because I feel like it's this experience of like heavy surveillance. Even when you're alone, it's always trying to make sure you're doing the quote-unquote right thing or going about something the right way and not knowing if you are or if you aren't. It's constantly trying to figure out how to come across as civilized or respectable, even when your more natural actions are not actually rude or ill-intentioned. A few more are training herself in social interactions through reading and studying other people, feeling great peace of mind when she knows she can stay at home all day, disliking being in a crowded mall, gym, or theater, imitating others without realizing it, rejecting and or questioning social norms, having a tendency to overshare my entire YouTube channel, feeling a sense of panic when faced with anything that requires a reasonable number of steps or amount of dexterity or know-how.
I don't know what any of this is. They didn't explain this, they just wheeled me on. Yeah, it's okay. It's like, we'll figure it out, buddy. There's so many instructions. I hate instructions.
But outside of, what it is and what the signs and traits are, do not go to Autism Speaks to gather any kind of research or information. Autism Speaks is a terrible entity. I want to kind of talk about autism representation in media, just because I think that it can be very highly problematic. In the book Unmasking Autism, the author got into some examples of, very stereotypical autistic representations. Some of those being Sean from The Good Doctor, Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, white, male, they have no social life, they're this genius. I found that when I was trying to watch Love on the Spectrum, it was really difficult because, one, there was obviously like this lack of diversity in the cast, but also they tended to infantilize the autistic people on the show. And by infantilize, I mean pretty much like treating them like children or like they are less than, because children are an inherently marginalized group themselves. I was on TikTok and there was a clip of Girl Meets World, and one of the characters, Farkle, came forward about potentially being autistic, and they were like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, we didn't mean that you were like that kind of different. It was just a really, really bad scene. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to see what I'm talking about, it's definitely out there. Now, what I will say is that there are a lot of characters on television that are coded as autistic. And what I mean by that is that their characters show signs of definitely, potentially being autistic. However, it's not like they ever say it explicitly in the show itself. A great example of this would be Wednesday Addams from the show Wednesday on Netflix, Daria from the show Daria, Beth Harmon from Queen's Gambit, Bob's Burgers. I'm thinking more specifically Tina. However, I think that the whole cast is neurodivergent, if we're being quite fucking honest. And then I haven't watched Stranger Things, but from research that I've done, Robin and Will present as autistic. What's interesting is that a lot of people love these characters. They love them for their differences and their quirks. However, if people in real life, portray these traits, they're not met with the same kind of fascination or understanding, I would say. And this has even been my own experience. A lot of autistic people, outside of the difficulties they may experience, are seen as entertainment rather than, full human beings. worthy of consideration. And one of the last things that I wanted to get into within this video is the concept of masking. Masking is pretty much the ability to hide your disability. Pretty much the more marginalized you are, the more you will have to mask. At the same time, masking over time leads to health complications, emotional distress, depression, anxiety, loss of your identity, or just who you are as a person. It's this double-edged sword. It's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. There's a tweet by my favorite person on Twitter and Medium. At this point, I genuinely believe that unmasking as an autistic is unsafe in most contexts of life to the point of near impossibility. I truly appreciate why we encourage each other to unmask, but without a corresponding change in the neurotypical dominated world, it feels like being asked to strip off the few defenses I have while I am still actively under attack. It's really easy to talk about unmasking now that more people know what autism is or that they are themselves autistic. However, people do it for a reason. It's not like autistic people just do it for fun. It's kind of like, but not exactly similar to Black people or people of color having to code switch or having to be quote unquote professional. All in all, to answer the question, does everybody have autism? The answer is no. Most people do not have autism, and the people that are identifying as autistic are not usually doing so to come across as different or special or unique. The autistic life expectancy is not that high. I've definitely experienced a lot of alienation and abuse because of it. Autistic people experience burnout and exhaustion from doing what many people would consider normal everyday tasks. To be autistic is to be constantly perceived as rude, uninterested, weird, or just defective. Everybody is not on the spectrum. Everybody is not a little bit or slightly autistic. It's about the severity and frequency of the things that you're experiencing. You can be sad a few times out the week. Maybe you had a bad day the day before, but that doesn't mean that you're depressed. You can have sensory sensitivities and wish that people utilize more direct communication, but that doesn't mean that you're autistic. It's very harmful and reductive to say that everybody experiences a very serious disability. And I think that because we have been so bombarded by the stereotypical presentations of autism, it has created a lot less space for compassion for those that don't present in the ways people expect them to. You cannot diagnose yourself off of one TikTok video, but I really hate how much social media and the internet is demonized as a space for, learning more information. It's important to obviously do more research, but just because something comes from the internet or social media doesn't mean that it's not true. Like, if we were to really interrogate the history of Western psychology, I also just need us to stop saying that things have gone too far once marginalized groups have access to information and certain opportunities. If you are an autistic person, I hope that you feel a little bit more validated, just because I know that a lot of discourse around this has been really toxic and harmful. People are very adamant about sticking to what has always been the truth and status quo when things are always subject to change and are always evolving. I think a lot of people are lacking in compassion and critical thought. And I just hope that as more people come out about their experiences as autistic people, we can normalize there not being something inherently wrong with us because we have differences. People often look at being different as being an attention seeker when most people cannot change the fact that they are different from the majority or act in different ways than what people find acceptable. It's not always a choice. I went into more depth about my own personal experiences on my Patreon, so definitely check that out because I'm not quite sure if I'll get into it on here. I don't really think that we're there yet. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that this is the beginning of the end of conversations like everybody's got autism or everybody's slightly autistic. It's not the case whatsoever. But yeah, I'm done.